question I've been asked a couple of times on this channel, and I've seen plenty of times across the internet on various forums and so on, is what tools should I get? What power tools should I get? I'm interested in armouring, I'm starting armourer, whatever it is, I'm working to a limited budget. What are the power tools I ought to get? So this isn't going to be a product review of each of these, it's just a look at each of the tools that I've found I use the most. These are the 4 most used hand tools in my workshop. Starting with probably the singularly most used one of all 4 of them is a grinder. Just a standard grinder, takes various discs and so on. I tend to like Makita tools, but I said I won't diverge into a product review. So I'd say a grinder is pretty imperative. If you're going to remove rivets, if you've got large sheets of material and you don't have a decent set of cutters, perhaps you're just using hand cutters, something like that, you can get really close with an angle grinder with a sort of 1mm slit disc, and you can then finish and file off with a handset like that. So I would put first and foremost on my list, certainly the way that I work, a grinder in first. Now I have gone and bought a reasonably expensive nice one after a few years, but what I used to do was I would just go and get a cheap one from the local store out here. There are groups like Wix, B&Q and so on, and you get a 12-month warranty with those if they fail through just general use. And those cheap ones, they don't tend to last very long, but if you keep the receipts and so on, you can take them back. And I think I took mine back about 4 times, and each time the warranty starts again. You're not misusing the tool, you're not trying to break it, it just fails, and you can take it back to them and get it exchanged. So that can be a cheap way of keeping going with a cheaper tool, but I've never looked back after I saved my pennies and bought this one. The next most used tool, I would say, is a drill. You use it for removing rivets, putting in the holes for rivets, anything that requires this. With attachments like this, you can use it for brushing down equipment. You can even use it for cleaning. There's various attachments you can get to put in these. What I prefer are these self-tightening chucks to the ones with the keys, because you're always losing the key. So I'd recommend getting a self chuck like that, and most importantly for your drill, get one that's got a variable speed. Oh, it's not even plugged in. There we go, so I took them all out so I could move them around. But variable speed is I think an absolute must, particularly with metalwork. When you're drilling metalwork, you want to keep the revs down relatively low compared to, say, some woods and so on. And you've got more control over what's happening on the surface. You don't suddenly skate off across it and so on. So I'd say a variable speed. This one's got the setting there, but from the trigger as well. I would definitely say the second most used hand power tool that I own is a drill. Like I say, variable speed on the trigger and a self chuck like this, as opposed to one that uses a chuck key. The third most used tool is got to be the cutter. Now these can come in various shapes and forms and can get very expensive very quickly. Even the cheap ones, if you're going to get one that works relatively well, can be expensive. They're so much better than a hand cutter. You'll wonder why you waited so long to buy a decent set of cutters, but it just depends on the amount of work you're doing. If you're just doing this as a hobby, having a bit of fun every now and then, once or twice a month, then, you know, what the hell, just use the hand cutters. If you're there cutting metal all day, every day, I would really recommend looking at the various power tools that can assist, or the Beverly shear, or whatever it is. I get on really well with this. Some people hate them. They're a bit weighty, but I've done a full review of this one. I love it. It's absolutely fantastic, and I've never looked back since I got it. So a decent cutter. Personally, I don't like nibblers. They're the ones that take out little crescent shapes. You can get really tight shapes with them, but they just fill your workshop with crescents of sharp material in very short order if you're not careful. So I get on really well with this. Like I say, there's lightweight versions, heavyweight, and I think there's almost like a super heavyweight category one above this. But I get on really well with this, and there's a review I'll put a link below in the comments to. And finally, he's looking a bit sad at the moment because I've managed to snap the last of my belts that went on there. I bought some cheap ones in a rush. Don't do that to yourself, they just snap. Absolute garbage these were. Spend some proper money and get some decent belts and you'll thank yourself for it. But it's a power file or a finger file. The belt, when it's working, sits on top like that, and you can use the tip here or this bit here for moving. Absolutely brilliant for deburring metal. Even if you've got simple strips like this, you can just run it along and it'll lift that tough edge off it, or that sharp edge rather, straight off of that. It's fantastic for removing rivets, for cleaning things back, getting into tight spaces. It's marvellous. You can do without it, and you can go down the conventional file route using all the various different shapes of file that come, but as soon as you get yourself one of these, when it's right for the job, it just can save you hours, probably days in its entire lifetime. They last reasonably well. I tend to stick with the Black & Decker on this. I'm sure there's better versions, but this one works well, and they're really speedy with the parts, because what can happen on them is this wears down and falls out, or you run out of these, or sometimes even the arm can break if you drop it. But I found Black & Decker to be really swift with the parts, but I'm sure everybody else is, and they're good for woodworkers and all that sort of stuff as well. So there you go, the 4 most used tools, if I can fit them all on it, that I have in my workshop. Of course, depending on the way you work, different tools will get used, but I use these 4 every day that I'm armouring, and they're absolutely fantastic, and they've saved me, must be forever. They're fantastic. And have worked really well for me. So if you're working to a tight budget, these are the tools I would go for in that order: the grinder, the drill, trying to remember, the cutter, and then the power file, or maybe the other way around, but those last 2. But certainly a grinder and the drill first if you're working to a tight budget. And you work the way I work in the videos. Each armourer works in his own way. That's what I've found to works well for me. So there you go, good luck and happy hunting.